Okay. Good.
Michael, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on. This is
Always.
a pleasure.
My friend, first start with telling people what it is that you do exactly. I know you write and cover politics, but talk a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. I've been writing about New York City politics for almost 4 years now. This was something I was involved with, since I was in college. When I graduated Boston College, I worked for Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez for a year. I then worked for Yusef Salaam, one of the Exonerated Central Park Five, who won a city council race in Harlem. I worked in research. I worked as a campaign manager. But now I'm writing. I'm actually writing a book, kind of as we speak. So I have more time to publish articles and opine, and it was a very good timing with the New York City mayoral race. So
Perfect.
words
All
are
right.
my
All
medium
right.
of expression.
All
Yeah.
right. So let's get to it now. Is Cuomo the next mayor of New York City? Is it in the bag? What needs to happen, or what do you think the odds are of him losing? And okay, give me a doomsday scenario. What are the probabilities based on your analysis? And does anyone have a shot at beating him?
I think Cuomo's odds of winning are probably 90%, maybe even a little more. It's not fully like in the bag, but he has a lot of decided advantages that aren't really going away anytime soon. I think I don't want to paint with broad strokes, but I think there were elements of kind of the political class, the pundit class, who were relatively late to diagnose the fact that Cuomo was certainly a stronger opponent than Eric Adams would have been, but that also that some of the attacks against him are, just to this point, do not seem to be resonating. And that even with, you know, the the next 6 weeks of television, that he still kind of built a very strong and relatively insulated coalition. So that I don't expect him to completely crater. And that there are all these comparisons to, well, it happened to Andrew Yang, it happened to Christine Quinn. I'm not, I never really bought into that because New York City, at the end of the day, it's a city of neighborhoods. And I could see Andrew Cuomo doing well in many neighborhoods across many boroughs. This was not kind of solely a product of name recognition. But I do think there is still time, and that there's certainly a perfect storm that exists that can potentially stop him. But it would take a lot, and yeah.
Quick question for you: in a mixed match world, let's say some of the folks polling um, at the bottom decide, similar to what Yang and Catherine Garcia did, to make it a more interesting, more competitive race against current Mayor Adams. What do you think would be the mix and match that would sort of help any of the candidates, maybe even come
I
close the
think you would
gap,
need
right?
right. I think you would need the other three quasi-viable candidates, Zohran Mamdani, Brad Lander, Adrian Adams. I think you need all three of them to explicitly tell their supporters you have to rank the other two, and three. I think without that, it's like a non-starter in terms of beating Cuomo. Even with that, I think it would be very difficult to stop him. Um, because at the end of the day, you might vote for somebody and they might then tell you, hey, these are the other people I'm ranking. I advise you to do this also. But voters are very smart. They do kind of what they want to do. So I'm relatively skeptical that even like a ranked choice strategy could be super effective. I think the more ideological voters, many people who support Ram Mamdani and Brad Lander, I think the ranked choice anti-Cuomo strategy would would fit them, and I think naturally they would even do something like that. But I think in terms of Adrienne Adams, if she tells her supporters, hey, don't rank Cuomo second, rank these two other people who you might never have heard of, you might never have seen over the former governor, whose father was governor, whom has visited where you lived, potentially even went to your church. I think that's a very tough sell. But I mean, it's certainly, if you're them, it's certainly worth trying.
So, question: the WFP trying to bring everyone together apparently has not worked out too well.
I think, well, no, I think that remains to be seen. They haven't even settled on a number one candidate to
But I'm
endorse
talking
yet.
about the notion of, hey, let's everyone come together to see if we can get a progressive or someone left leaning to, see if we can beat the former governor is doesn't seem to be playing out too well.
I think it's
I mean, there's like a
yeah,
non-aggression pact amongst certain candidates, but then you have others that are in that have not stepped down, have not, right? Uh,
yeah. Well, I think ranked choice voting, it just does not incentivize campaigns to drop out. The people also working on these campaigns, it's like they're getting paid, they get the matching funds, things like that. Like it's not really in anyone's interests to like drop out or step aside. Like everyone basically kind of continues onward. Certainly there's a strong case, I would say, for people who have matching funds who it might just not be happening for them to, essentially kind of kamikaze Cuomo with the tax, with things like that, just to try something. But right now, yes, it does not appear in mid-May, 5 weeks ish away from the election, that any of these things are sticking terribly well. And then also you have, candidates who, there are segments of the electorate that I do think Cuomo is kind of soft in, or vulnerable at least, segments of the electorate that thus far are supporting him that could be liable for defection at some point that have not really been tapped into. You saw there was a Marist poll released Wednesday. Obviously, like people kind of categorizing their own political beliefs is interesting, and there's flaws in that and whatnot. But Cuomo, with people who identified themselves as liberal, he was crushing the rest of the field. He had 35%. Brad Lander had only 13%. Zohran Mamdani had only 13%. Certainly, that is a demographic that these candidates should be performing better with than they are at the moment. I think Cuomo is kind of soft with that group of people, but right now he's almost like winning them by default because there are a
can
lot
I
of people
can
who are
I
willing
can
to.
I can I
Yeah, go for it.
inter
Go for it.
can I interject real
Yeah,
quick? And I want your thoughts
absolutely.
on this.
Yeah,
80% of New Yorkers feel that the city's moving in the wrong direction, and I
yeah,
think the liberal term um, is used very loosely, right? Like the
hmm
term progressive. I don't think it's a one size fits all. And the reality is that no matter how you slice it, whether it's in a world where you have all this social media and it's we live in a viral world, right, where everything is sensationalized. The reality is, real or imagined, I don't care if you're liberal, I don't care if you're moderate, I don't care if you're conservative. One thing prevails: people do not feel safe. People feel there's a level of lawlessness in New York City, for, again, real or imagined, whether it's the anomaly of somebody pushing somebody on the train tracks, the anomaly of someone burning someone, right, alive. That doesn't seem to, no matter how many times there are metrics and numbers that show this is nowhere near New York City in the 80s and the 70s, it doesn't seem to stick in people's minds. People just feel, and again, a lot of it is really attributed to the mental health crisis and the treatment of people that are mentally ill, that are not getting the resources and the help that they need. But I think a lot of it stems from that people can't get over the fact, of this notion that um, things are out of control. And again, a lot of it is sensationalized because the numbers don't reflect that reality. But you
Well,
know,
I mean, also, for instance, I live very close to Morningside Park. Now, when my father 40 years ago would walk around Morningside Park, they would tell everybody stay away. There were crack vials everywhere, things like that. Today, Morningside Park is beautiful. You can be there at all hours of the day and have a really wonderful experience. I say that because there are parts of New York City that used to be really, really struggling that are now gentrified, that are now very, built up and things like that. And that kind of contributes to that lower crime numbers, that kind of perception that we're talking about. But then also there are parts of the city who were struggling mightily 30, 40 years ago, who are still kind of struggling today. But those neighborhoods are kind of out of the purview of, you know, people who are on television, the people who write about the city, things like that. Like the media class doesn't really come from there. So it's kind of lost in kind of these discussions about, well, how bad actually is crime and things like that. And so where the people who live there, when you speak to them, they still very much feel that this anxiety, this sense of unease, but I think that kind of cultural gap there can in some ways explain some of why our politics breaks down the way it is.
but I think that's the misconception because people assume that a liberal voter is a brownstoner when a liberal voter can be in the South Bronx, can be in, I don't want to single that neighborhood out, right? But lower income neighborhoods throughout the city because they're relying on social safety nets in some cases, right? They're relying on NYCHA and funding and other things, right? Because that's the reality. Um, and I think that's the misconception that there is this sort of either or.
Hmm.
Michael, let's
And
let's let's move on now to the down ballot races. How do you see these things playing out in terms of who do you think? Do you think it's in the bag for Jamani? Is it over, or does
yes, yes, I would be stunned if that race was close. You know, um, yeah. um, no, I would, I think Shamani will win very comfortably by over 20 points. I would be very surprised if that was even. You're gonna have a lot of Shamani Andrew Cuomo voters for sure, but I would be very surprised if that was a competitive affair. I'm more interested in the comptroller
no? And that's where I'm going next.
primary.
That's where I'm going next. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? It's. I mean, the last poll I saw had Mark Levine up by 25 points. But there is a lot of interesting, a lot of different and dynamics at play, right? There's the county leader Keith Wright in Manhattan against Espaillat. There's also the county leader in Brooklyn, Bashat, and her lifelong, not lifelong, but her differences with uh, Council Member Brannon and people sort of choosing sides around a lot of the endorsements. So it's getting really interesting there. Even the unions and how they've decided to endorse, it's sort of not, it's sort of split in some ways.
Hmm.
What do you think carries the day? Is it these voter rich areas? And even that, it's like when you think about the West Side, there's a lot of votes there. It'll be
Hmm.
interesting which way Southeast Queens leans, right? Because there's a lot of votes there as well. But I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, well, I mean, before Justin Brandon started running, I I went into this as like Martin Levine will probably win and probably win relatively comfortably. I mean, he has a lot of ties to very powerful unions and elected officials in Manhattan. He's someone who can appeal to a very diverse coalition of supporters, someone who could even one day run for mayor. Um, but Justin Brandon has, run a pretty strong campaign, I think what's interesting is that, for a while he's been a relatively, I would say, center left kind of figure. Not wholehearted, um, you know, leftist or a big time progressive by any means, but the progressive establishment, the Working Families Party, a lot of other left leaning elected officials have really rallied behind him, which I think if you're him and you're trying to make this a competitive race against someone like Mark Levine, I think that's kind of what you have to do. He's even scored some of these endorsements that you mentioned in Southeast Queens, so it's always interesting when kind of breaking down the ethnic and racial politics that kind of in many ways shape New York City, when you just have basically like two white candidates running against each other. It really then can come, then these endorsements and unions and certain like messaging distinctions can come into play more. I expect Brandon to win Brooklyn. I expect Mark Levine to win Manhattan. Obviously, those are not hot takes in and of itself, but it's kind of an interesting proxy war over, Manhattan dominated a lot of the civic life in New York for decades, really. But now Brooklyn, not only emerging as kind of the cultural capital of the city in recent years, but now
Who does Park Slope go to?
I think Park Slope would be a swing neighborhood, but I think Brandon would win Park Slope.
Interesting.
Like, no one, give me a month, I'll do a little predictions piece, but
All
if
right,
you
but
told me the way
you gotta
things are
pick
going right now,
you gotta
yeah,
pick one,
I'll
Michael.
pick
Who
it.
wins?
Brandon.
Who wins the
For the whole
comptroller's
race,
race? Yes.
I wouldn't bet against Mark Levine,
Okay, so
but I
no,
don't
you
think
gotta
it's going to be a
decide.
blowout. Yeah, I wouldn't bet against Mark Levine.
Okay, so you're saying Levine wins.
Yeah, yeah, but Brandon wins Park Slope.
Okay.
I think
Now,
Levine wins.
all right,
Yep.
so here's the other question now in terms of the Bronx. Now let's move to the Bronx. The borough president's race up there, Gibson, Salamanca. How do you handicap it?
So Salamanca has more money, but Gibson is the incumbent. She won last time. I think obviously the Bronx is a borough where there are more Hispanic Democrats than Black Democrats. Obviously, we talked about racial and ethnic politics kind of coming into play, but the Black electorate is, they turn out to vote in greater percentages, and that really helped Vanessa Gibson in her previous run 4 years ago against Fernando Cabrera. Um, a lot of it probably will come down to how the two perform in some of the more white and also South Asian enclaves in the borough. How do they kind of face off in Riverdale, Throgs Neck, Parkchester, Westchester Square, Morris Park, kind of that kind of like 5-6% of the electorate that really could kind of decide. Gibson did better in Riverdale. Cabrera did better in Throgs Neck last time. I would handicap that Gibson is a slight favorite despite having less money, just power of incumbency, and I think she'll do very, very well in the Northeast Bronx, which is still where a lot of votes come from.
All right,
Um, Very
Manhattan.
interesting.
Manhattan.
Manhattan. Okay, so we have a little East Side versus West Side. I think I saw Amy Klobuchar endorse Keith Powers the other day, which is very interesting. But Brad Hoylman, last time when he ran, he lost to Mark Levine because Levine really kind of he did really well on the Upper West Side and from Morningside on down to kind of the Lincoln Center area. Now that's like Brad Hoylman's turf. Brad Hoylman, because of redistricting with the state senate, he's kind of represented two like relatively different districts, but he's repped a lot of the West Side in his time, and he lost the West Side last time, and that's the reason he he ended up losing relatively narrowly, I think by a couple points. But this time I expect him to not only do really well on the West Side, but I expect him to win. East Side, will go for Powers. Stuytown will be interesting because both of them have represented Stuytown, but I just think there are more votes to be had on the west side. And I think Hoylman, with those two iterations of his district, is well positioned to kind of take advantage of that. He is the more liberal and progressive of the two, and I think that that will win the day. So I think he'll win by about 5%. Although
Brooklyn.
stay tuned, I'll do a predictions
Bro-
thing
Brooklyn.
later on. I think I would probably eat my shoe if Antonio Reynoso didn't win. Um, I see no reason to think that he won't.
I also want to talk about two council races: the
For
Alexa
sure, yeah,
Viles and
yes,
Shahana Hanif, which is again, as we see citywide, and we saw an article today about Zoran Mamdani in Israel, and it's and former Governor Cuomo and Mayor Adams, and the anti-Semitism thing. There is a lot there, right? It's become part of the sort of political narrative. What side are you on, or pick a side? Um, and this is a litmus test to that as well, right? These two races, to some extent, or largely the Shahana Hanif race,
yeah, more.
and then more so, and then the Alexa Viles race is just you know uh, lefty versus more moderate, and changing demographics in that part of town as well. What are your thoughts on both?
Yeah, so I'm on the record saying that Shahana Neef and Alexa Aviles will win by at least 15 points. And I don't really see a reason to kind of change from that. I mean, both of these districts are very, very progressive leaning, or at least a majority of the voters kind of feel that way. Obviously, APAC and Israel Palestine politics can cut against progressives in a negative way in a Bowman Latimer race in a place like Westchester, but Park Slope, Carroll Gardens, Windsor Terrace, Greenwood, that is not Westchester. Far from it. There are a lot of the electorate is increasingly young millennials and younger Gen X. People went to college, and they until I see a reason to doubt their left leaningness, um, I won't, and I think in the case of Avilas's district, it's like kind of split between like younger white renters who went to college, the Hispanic population of Sunset Park West, and then the Chinese population in Bensonhurst, Eicher Heights, and Sunset Park East. But the Chinese population, in terms of Democratic primary turnout, it is the less of those three demographic groups. Um, and also, I mean, with some of the realignment towards the Republican Party, I wouldn't be surprised to see even less participation in a Democratic primary. And Aviles, I think, will do very well amongst the Hispanic community in Sunset Park, and I think she will do very well amongst the white population in South Slope, Greenwood, Red Hook, etc. So I mean, I could see her winning by 25 or 30%. I'm not trying to put expectations on anybody, but I don't really think it'll be close. I think Zoran Mamdani will win that district as well at the top of the ticket. I think in terms of just getting kind of that base out, I think it'll do really well. In the Shahana Neef race, I mean, I wouldn't quite say 20 or 30 points, but I think she'll win by a comfortable 15. I think if that race is close, it means that you know, Cuomo wins in like a landslide by a lot because if progressive candidates are falling in Park Slope, that's kind of the beginning of the end for the that the alphabet left and that type of political thing. So yeah, I expect them to both win comfortably. Do you mind if I say a couple words about the 14th council district in the Bronx? I don't
Okay.
think it's gotten a lot of attention. It's Piorina Sanchez versus Fernando Cabrera. There are
Yeah.
also two other people on the ballot. So, okay, shameless plug. Don't kill me for this. I will be writing a piece on this race because I think it's been very overlooked. Sometimes in service of the other two races, sometimes in service of the top of the ticket. Piorina Sanchez, she's been in office for 4 years. She won a very competitive race in 2021, supported by Adriana Espaillat, Rishi Torres. Um, Many different unions, things like that. She's one of the progressive caucus members. But Fernando Cabrera, he's a more conservative pastor. He represented that district for 3 terms. I think it has eerie kind of shades of the Alika Ampry Samuel race versus Darlene Mealy 4 years ago, where you have a council member who was termed out, who represented the district for a long time, come back and run against someone who's been in office for 4 years, who's more left leaning and, kind of does politics in a little bit of a different way. And then you could have potential for some type of upset where an incumbent loses. And I'm just saying, I am watching that race
Okay, so
extremely
make
close.
a
Right.
prediction because 3 minutes.
You're
We
big on
have
the
3 minutes.
predictions.
We have three
Okay.
minutes, Michael. You got to
You
make a
know,
call here.
I'll say that Fiorina wins.
Okay,
Fairly big, yeah. Yeah.
by a
but
lot, or
but
it'll
I'm
be
watching
close.
it very
It'll be
close.
close.
It'll be very close. I mean, voter turnout in that part of the Bronx is arguably, or is actually, it might be the worst in New York City. So it will not take a lot to kind of move that race one way or the other. But I'm watching it very closely, and I encourage all listeners of the podcast and well beyond to spend time in that district and
All
watch
right,
it closely.
we got to
Yeah,
wrap, but I want one last
for sure.
question, and you have to give
Oh
me a
boy.
quick, short answer. How
Oh,
much does
my favorite.
AOC's endorsement matter in the
A
mayoral
lot,
race?
a lot, a lot, a
Wait, do you
lot.
think it's enough to sort of overcome this huge lead that former Governor Cuomo has? Will it have
More
that big of
plug.
an impact?
Okay, I'm actually writing about this right now, but it will only do that if she puts a lot in. One rally or a press release or something like that, it won't do enough. She has to invest her political capital. In order to endorse it, I'm talking about going on television, doing rallies, using her profile to build that person up to stop Cuomo. Who knows if that's what she decides to do, but that is the only way that basically she might be the best chance to stop Andrew Cuomo.
All right, last thing, you got to pick one. If you were
Oh
to
boy.
say pick one in terms of an endorsement, and one has already committed, right? Would you pick in this mayoral race in this time an endorsement of Attorney General Tish James or an endorsement of Congressmember Ocasio Cortez? If you had to pick one.
I would go with I would go with AOC purely just because, well, not purely, but she's kind of she's right now at her in her 6 years in Congress, she's kind of at her apex right now. Being identified as the face of the Democratic Party. You know, she was polled against Chuck Schumer, was up 15, 16 points. I think it's her, but I do think Adrienne Adams should, as soon as she gets matching funds, cut a TV advertisement with Letitia James.
Interesting.
But
Michael,
yeah,
we gotta wrap this up, but I wanna have continue this conversation as things continue to heat up, and I wanna thank you for doing this, okay?
of course. Thank you for reaching out. Have a nice day.